Ngozi wasn't sure what to expect when Idris called her that evening. His voice was calm but firm, asking her to meet him at his office. She hesitated but eventually agreed, curiosity and a nagging sense of guilt urging her forward. When she arrived, Idris was seated at his desk, his face thoughtful but somber. He gestured to a chair across from him. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I'm only here because I need answers," she replied, folding her arms. "You deserve them," Idris said, leaning forward. "But I need you to listen without judgment, Ngozi. Can you do that?" She nodded reluctantly. Idris took a deep breath and began. "Years ago, I was engaged to a woman named Aina," Idris said, his voice tinged with sadness. "We were young, deeply in love, and planning our future together. I thought we had it all: dreams, faith, and a commitment to build a life of purpose." Ngozi noticed the way his eyes softened as he spoke, but there was a shadow of pain behind them. "We started a construction firm together with my best friend, Deo," Idris continued. "The three of us were inseparable. Deo was like a brother to me, and Aina adored him. I trusted him completely, never imagining he could betray me." Ngozi leaned forward slightly, her interest piqued. "About a year into our engagement, things began to change. Aina became distant, and I couldn't understand why. I thought it was the stress of the business or wedding planning. But then one day, she confessed." He paused, his voice cracking slightly. "She told me she'd fallen in love with Deo." Ngozi gasped. "What?" Idris nodded, his face grim. "It broke me, Ngozi, my best friend, and my fiancé. I couldn't believe it, but I didn't fight them. I let her go because I loved her and wanted her to be happy. At first, I thought I could move on," Idris continued. "But things got worse. Deo and Aina's relationship didn't last. She left him after just a few months, ran off to the United States with another man, taking a large sum of money Deo had stolen from the company." Ngozi's eyes widened. "She stole the money?" "Yes," Idris said. "Deo had funneled funds from our joint accounts to support Aina's lavish tastes, and when she left, the company was on the brink of collapse. I found out too late. He came to me, accusing me of orchestrating everything, of pushing Aina to betray him. It was absurd, but Deo needed someone to blame." "So, he made you the villain?" Ngozi asked, her voice softer now. Idris nodded. "Exactly. He swore he'd make me pay, that I was the reason his life fell apart. I could have sued him for fraud and defamation, but I didn't. I knew his pain came from a place of hurt and humiliation. Instead, I took on the debt, worked tirelessly to rebuild, and eventually started over. Since then, I've been cautious, especially with matters of the heart," Idris admitted, his voice quieter now. "It's hard to trust when you've been betrayed by the people closest to you. I've poured myself into my work and my faith, hoping to find peace." He looked directly at Ngozi. "That's why I've been searching for true love, not something based on appearances or convenience, but a deep, genuine connection. I thought I'd found it in you, Ngozi." Her heart skipped a beat, but she quickly masked her emotions. "Me," she said, her voice sharp. "Why would you think that?" "Because despite your doubts, your strength and faith shine through," he said earnestly. "You're intelligent, passionate, and uncompromising. But you've built walls around your heart, just like I did after Aina. I see that in you, because I recognize it in myself." Ngozi was silent, his words striking a chord she wasn't ready to acknowledge. "But what about Deo?" she asked after a long pause. "Why haven't you cleared your name?" Idris sighed. "Because forgiveness is a cornerstone of my faith, Ngozi. I've resisted the urge to sue him because I believe revenge won't bring healing. Instead, I've tried to live in a way that honors God, trusting that the truth will prevail in time." Ngozi frowned. "But he's out there spreading lies about you. Doesn't that bother you?" "Of course it does," Idris admitted. "But I've learned that holding on to anger only poisons the soul. Deo's bitterness is his burden to carry, not mine." Ngozi sat back, her mind reeling. Idris's story had unraveled every assumption she'd made about him. He wasn't the hypocrite she'd imagined, but a man scarred by betrayal and yet still striving to live with integrity. But her resistance wasn't completely gone. "This is a lot to process," she said finally. "I can't promise anything, Idris. I need time." Idris smiled faintly. "Take all the time you need, Ngozi. I just needed you to know the truth." As she left his office that evening, a strange mix of emotions churned within her. Guilt, admiration, and something else she couldn't quite name. For the first time, Ngozi wondered if the walls she'd built around her heart were keeping her safe, or keeping her from something extraordinary. That night, after Ngozi returned home, she tossed and turned in her bed, her mind replaying Idris's revelations. When she finally drifted into sleep, the nightmare began. She was in an unfamiliar place, a vast, open field surrounded by dense trees. Idris stood in the distance, his eyes fixed on her. Without a word, he began to walk toward her. His steps quickened, and soon he was running. Panic surged through her chest, and she turned to flee, her feet pounding against the ground as she raced through the field. "No. Stay away," she screamed, but Idris kept coming, his expression unreadable. Just as he was about to reach her, she stumbled and fell, waking up with a jolt. Her heart raced as she sat up in bed, drenched in sweat. "What is happening to me?" she thought, clutching her chest. The nightmares didn't stop. Each night, the scene changed slightly. Sometimes she was in a crowded market, sometimes in a deserted street, but the pattern remained the same. Idris was always chasing her, and she was always running. By the fifth night, Ngozi could barely sleep. The dreams were starting to feel like a message, but she couldn't decipher it. Was it her fears manifesting, or was God trying to tell her something? One Sunday morning, after yet another restless night, Ngozi found herself staring at Idris across the church during service. He was speaking with a group of parishioners, his demeanor calm and kind. For the first time, she felt a twinge of guilt for how harshly she'd judged him. Her thoughts were interrupted when Pastor Adebayo approached her. "Ngozi, how are you?" She hesitated, then sighed. "Honestly, Pastor, I'm confused. I've been having these dreams, and they're all about Idris. I don't understand why." The pastor smiled knowingly. "Dreams can often be a reflection of our inner struggles. Perhaps you're running not from Idris, but from the possibility of love." Ngozi blinked, taken aback. I don't know." The pastor placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Take your time, but don't let fear guide your decisions. If you feel it's right, talk to him. Ask him whatever you need to." That evening, Ngozi took a leap of faith. She called Idris. "Idris," she said hesitantly, "I've been thinking about our last conversation, and I have more questions. Would you come over tomorrow evening so we can talk?" Idris sounded surprised but agreed immediately. "Of course. What time?" 7, she said. When Idris arrived at her home the next evening, Ngozi was a bundle of nerves. She had spent hours rehearsing what to say, but now that he was here, her words felt jumbled. Idris, ever observant, noticed her unease. "Ngozi, you don't have to be nervous," he said as he took a seat. "I'll answer any question you have. No filters, no evasions." She nodded, clasping her hands tightly in her lap. "I need to understand everything, Idris. I've heard your story, but I need to know who you are beyond that. What drives you? What do you want from me?" Idris leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Ngozi, what drives me is my faith and the desire to live a life of purpose. I've seen how quickly material things can vanish, how relationships can crumble without trust and integrity. I've made mistakes, but I've learned from them. And what do you want from me?" She pressed, her voice trembling. "I want your heart," he said simply. "But only if you're willing. I don't want to force you into anything. I want a partner who trusts me, even with my flaws." Ngozi looked away, her emotions swirling. "It's not that simple," she said softly. "I know it's not," Idris replied. "But I'm willing to wait as long as it takes. Breaking the walls." For hours they talked. Idris shared more about his upbringing, his struggles, and his dreams for the future. Ngozi found herself laughing at his stories and marveling at his resilience. Yet, her fears lingered. Finally, she voiced the question that had been haunting her. Idris, what if this doesn't work? What if I say yes and everything falls apart? He looked at her, his gaze steady. Then we'll face it together. Relationships aren't about guarantees, Ngozi. They're about commitment and faith. And I'm willing to give both to you. Her heart ached at his sincerity, but her mind screamed caution. She knew she couldn't give him an answer yet, but for the first time, she allowed herself to entertain the possibility of saying yes. The conversation between Idris and Ngozi was deepening, becoming more personal with every word. But just as Idris finished answering her last question, he surprised her with one of his own. Ngozi, he began, his tone gentle but firm, I've told you about my past, my pain, my mistakes, and my hopes. Now, I need to know about you. What are you running from? What's holding you back? Ngozi stiffened. My past isn't the issue here, Idris, she said quickly. Maybe not, he said, but it's part of who you are. I want to understand you fully, just as I've let you understand me. If we're going to build something real, we need to be honest with each other. Ngozi avoided his gaze, her fingers gripping the edge of her chair. I can't, she said after a long pause. Not yet. Idris tilted his head, his expression thoughtful. Why not? She raised her eyes to meet his, a flicker of defiance in her gaze. Because you haven't answered everything, Idris. There are still things about you that don't make sense to me. If you want my story, you'll have to explain a few things first. Idris leaned back in his chair, intrigued.
Fair enough, he said.
What do you want to know? Ngozi took a deep breath, steadying herself. Why did you come to my house personally as a plumber? A man of your status could have easily sent one of your workers. Was it a test? Idris smiled faintly. I'll answer that, but go on. She continued, her voice gaining confidence. And why haven't you changed your name since you converted to Christianity? I know Idris is a common name, but it's also strongly associated with Islam. Most converts would have chosen a new identity to reflect their faith. Idris nodded, encouraging her to proceed. Why do you choose to live so humbly, despite your wealth? You could live in luxury, drive flashy cars, and flaunt your success. But instead, you work quietly, help people in need, and avoid the spotlight.
Why?
Her final question came with a hint of curiosity and admiration. And why are you so focused on philanthropy? Most wealthy men chase more wealth, but you seem content giving it away. What's your motivation? Idris chuckled softly. You've been thinking about this for a while, haven't you? Ngozi crossed her arms. I need to understand you before I can decide anything. Idris leaned forward, his gaze steady. I'll answer every single one of your questions, Ngozi. I'll even tell you the things you didn't think to ask. But on one condition. What condition? She asked, narrowing her eyes. You have to tell me about your past, he said simply. All of it. No walls, no defenses. If I'm going to share my truth, I need yours in return. Ngozi hesitated, her heart pounding. That's not fair, Idris. You're asking for something I'm not ready to give. And yet you expect me to bare my soul to you. He countered gently. Ngozi, I'm not asking for perfection. I just want honesty. If we're going to move forward, we both need to trust each other. Her defenses wavered, and she sighed.
Fine.
But you go first. Idris shook his head, smiling. No, you go first. You've promised me an answer before, and I've waited patiently. Once I hear your story, I'll give you mine and more. Ngozi frowned, weighing her options. She hated feeling cornered, but something in Idris's sincerity softened her resolve. All right, she said quietly. But if I tell you everything, I want your answers tonight. No more delays. Idris nodded. You have my word. Ngozi sat in silence for a long moment, her hands gripping the hem of her blouse. She had spent years locking away the memories Idris now asked her to uncover. But his steady gaze and gentle presence gave her a strange sense of safety. You want to know my story, she said softly, almost to herself.
Fine.
But don't interrupt. Idris nodded, leaning forward to listen. I wasn't always this guarded, you know, Ngozi began. Once, I was a young woman full of dreams, eager to love and be loved. I met someone in my final year of university. His name was Kenneth. Her voice caught slightly at the name. He was charming, ambitious, and deeply spiritual, or so I thought. We were inseparable, and I believed God had brought us together. We even started planning our future, marriage, a home, children. I trusted him completely. Idris didn't move, his expression solemn. Kenneth proposed to me just after graduation. It was the happiest day of my life, she said with a sad smile. I thought I had everything. But things changed quickly after we got engaged. He became distant, distracted, always finding reasons to delay the wedding. She paused, her voice trembling. One day, I found out why. Kenneth was having an affair with my best friend, Chinyere. Idris's eyes widened in shock, but he stayed silent. I confronted him, and he didn't even deny it. Ngozi continued, her voice hardening. He told me he loved her, but didn't know how to tell me. Worse, he said he'd only proposed to me because I was the ideal Christian wife, but she was the one he truly wanted. Ngozi's eyes glistened with unshed tears. Do you know how it feels to be told you're good enough for duty but not for love? To be betrayed by the two people you trusted most. Idris shook his head, his throat tightening. I broke off the engagement, of course, Ngozi said. But the damage was done. Everyone in my church knew. My friends, my family, they all pitied me, and I hated it. I withdrew from everyone, even God. I threw myself into work, telling myself I didn't need love or anyone else. Her voice softened, tinged with bitterness. But deep down, I've been running ever since. Running from the fear that it'll happen again. That if I let someone in, they'll find a way to hurt me, just like Kenneth did. She looked at Idris, her expression guarded. So, there you have it. My story. Are you happy now? For a moment, Idris couldn't speak. His chest ached with the weight of her pain. He had seen strength in Ngozi before, but now he understood the depth of her resilience and the scars that came with it. Ngozi, he said finally, his voice thick with emotion. I'm so sorry. No one deserves what you went through. She shrugged, trying to mask her vulnerability. It's in the past. I've moved on. No, you haven't, Idris said gently, his eyes glistening with tears. You've built walls around your heart, and you've locked yourself inside. You're not free, Ngozi. Her lip trembled, but she quickly looked away. Idris reached across the table, his hand resting lightly on hers. I can't change what happened to you, but I can promise you this. I'll never betray you. I'll never take your love for granted. And I'll never stop fighting for your healing, even if you push me away. Ngozi's defenses cracked, a single tear slipping down her cheek. Why, Idris? Why would you care so much? Because I see you, he said simply. And because I've been where you are, broken, betrayed, and afraid to trust again. But I've learned that healing doesn't come from hiding. It comes from letting the right people in. Ngozi didn't respond immediately, her emotions a swirling storm. But for the first time in years, she felt something shift, a tiny flicker of hope piercing through the walls she'd built. Finally, she met his gaze. You still owe me answers, Idris. About your name, your choices, everything. Idris smiled through his own tears. And you'll get them. But first, promise me something. What? She asked cautiously. Promise me you'll let me walk this journey with you. Not as a condition for anything, but because you deserve to be free of the past. Ngozi hesitated, then nodded. I'll try. It wasn't a full yes, but it was enough for Idris. Ngozi sat quietly, her heart still heavy from her own revelations. Idris watched her closely, sensing the vulnerability she had just exposed. He knew it was his turn now to answer her questions, to lay himself bare. He took a deep breath, leaning forward slightly. Ngozi, you've asked me some important questions, and I promised you the truth.
So here it is.
Idris smiled faintly. That's probably the question that's been bothering you the most. Ngozi nodded. Yes, it has. A man of your means doesn't need to get his hands dirty. So why did you? I went because I wanted to remind myself of where I came from, Idris began. I wasn't born wealthy, Ngozi. I grew up in a small house with 6 siblings and parents who worked tirelessly to provide for us. My father was a plumber, and I started helping him when I was just a boy. He paused, his gaze distant. Even after I built my company and became successful, I never wanted to forget the value of hard work or humility. When I take on small jobs like that, it grounds me. It reminds me of the people I serve and the kind of man I want to be. But why my house? Ngozi pressed. Idris hesitated, then smiled sheepishly. Because of you. I'd heard about you through some mutual acquaintances at church. When I saw your name on the work order, I decided to take it myself. I wanted to meet you, not as a CEO, but as someone real. I wanted to see how you treated someone you thought was ordinary. Ngozi blinked, her cheeks flushing slightly. You didn't disappoint, he added with a soft chuckle. You were kind, even if you were a little suspicious of me. Ngozi shifted in her seat, her curiosity deepening. And your name? Why didn't you choose a Christian one after your conversion? Idris nodded thoughtfully. When I became a Christian, I considered it. I even prayed about it. But the answer I received was clear. God didn't need me to change my name to prove my faith. My name, Idris, is part of my identity and my heritage. It's a reminder of where I've been and how far I've come. He smiled slightly. Besides, Idris means interpreter or teacher, and I believe God uses me in those roles every day. My name may have Islamic roots, but my life is a testimony to Christ. I decided it was more important to let my actions reflect my faith than to adopt a new label. Ngozi nodded slowly, her respect for him growing. Her next question was softer. You could live so differently, Idris. You've earned it. So, why do you choose this lifestyle? Idris's expression turned serious. Because wealth is a tool, not a purpose. I've seen how easily money can corrupt people, how it can make them forget what truly matters.
I don't want to be one of those people.
I live simply because it keeps me focused on the things that matter most. My faith, my relationships, and the work I'm called to do. He glanced at her. And, honestly, I've had my fair share of luxuries. They don't bring happiness. Giving back, helping others, living a life of purpose. That's what fulfills me. Ngozi tilted her head, her eyes narrowing slightly. And your philanthropy? What drives it? Idris smiled warmly. I've been blessed, Ngozi. More than I ever imagined possible. I believe that blessings are meant to be shared, not hoarded. When I see someone in need, I think about the times when I needed help and someone stepped in for me. It's my way of paying it forward. He paused, his voice softening. But it's also personal. After Aina's betrayal, I realized I'd been so focused on building wealth that I'd neglected the things that really matter. Giving became my way of healing, of finding meaning again. When he finished, silence filled the room. Ngozi sat quietly, her heart swelling with admiration and something else she couldn't quite name. Thank you, she said finally, for being honest with me. Idris reached for her hand, his touch gentle. Thank you for trusting me with your story, too. Ngozi, I know you've been hurt, and I don't blame you for being cautious. But I want you to know that I'm here, not to fix you, but to walk with you through whatever comes next. Ngozi's eyes glistened with unshed tears. You're a remarkable man, Idris. And honestly, I don't know if I'm ready for what you're asking. But she hesitated, then smiled faintly. I'm willing to try. Idris's face lit up, his relief palpable. That's all I ask. As Idris stepped out of Ngozi's house that night, the crisp air greeted him. The conversation they'd shared had left him both hopeful and reflective. But as he approached the gate, something unusual caught his eye, a small basket sitting just outside, covered with a soft blanket. Idris, what is that? Ngozi's voice came from behind him. She had followed him to the gate, her curiosity piqued by his pause. Idris crouched down and carefully pulled back the blanket. His breath hitched. Lying inside was a beautiful newborn baby girl, her tiny face serene, her hands clutching at the air as if reaching for something or someone. Oh my God, Ngozi whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. The baby stirred, letting out a soft whimper that tugged at both their hearts. There was no note, no explanation. Only the child, abandoned to an uncertain fate. What do we do? Ngozi asked, her voice trembling. Idris sighed, his mind racing. The first thing is to make sure she's safe. Let's take her to the nearest police station. They'll know what to do. Ngozi nodded, though her gaze lingered on the baby. She's so beautiful, she murmured. They carefully picked up the basket and placed it in Idris's car. The drive to the station was silent, save for the baby's occasional coos. At the station, the officers listened to their account and examined the basket. Well, it looks like she was abandoned, one of them said, his tone gruff but not unkind. But we can't take her in right now. You'll have to keep her until we can investigate and decide the next steps. Keep her? Ngozi exclaimed.
But
It's just temporary, the officer assured them. A day or two, max. We'll call you with updates. Back in the car, Idris glanced at Ngozi. So, what now? You'll have to take her, Ngozi said, biting her lip. I have to be at the bank early tomorrow and you have more flexibility. Idris nodded reluctantly.
fine.
But I don't even have baby supplies. Ngozi hesitated. I'll help you get everything you need. In fact, she trailed off, her mind racing. I'll come with you to your house tonight. I want to make sure she's okay. Idris raised an eyebrow. Are you sure? It's late. I'm sure, Ngozi said firmly. Let's go. As they pulled up to Idris's mansion, Ngozi's jaw dropped. The sprawling estate, illuminated by soft outdoor lighting, looked like something out of a fairy tale. The manicured lawns, the grand fountain at the entrance, and the elegant architecture left her speechless. I knew you were wealthy, but this, she whispered, unable to finish her sentence. Idris parked the car and smiled. Come inside. You'll get used to it. Inside, the housemaids greeted them warmly, their faces lighting up when they saw the baby. Oh, what a precious little angel, one of them exclaimed, taking the baby from Idris's arms with practiced ease. We'll take care of her, sir, another assured him. Don't worry. Ngozi watched as the staff seamlessly set up a makeshift nursery in one of the guest rooms. Their efficiency and care left her awestruck. For a moment, she felt like royalty, a feeling that was both humbling and overwhelming. That night, Ngozi lay awake in one of Idris's lavish guest rooms. Her mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Was it the unexpected discovery of the baby that had her so shaken? Or the warmth of Idris's staff, who treated her as if she were already part of the family? Or was it the man himself? She replayed their evening conversation in her mind, remembering his honesty, his humility, and the deep sense of purpose that guided him. And now, seeing his world, his wealth, his generosity, and his ability to remain grounded despite it all, she felt her heart leaning toward him in ways she hadn't allowed before. As she finally drifted off to sleep, one thought lingered in her mind. This man, I have to marry him. The next morning, Idris insisted on driving her to work. As they stepped out of the mansion, a sleek sports car awaited them. Ngozi hesitated. You're really going to drive me in that? Why not? Idris said with a grin, opening the passenger door for her. The ride to her office was surreal. As they pulled up to the bank, her colleagues stared in awe, their eyes darting between Ngozi and the luxury car. She stepped out, her head held high, her emotions a mix of pride and humility. For the first time in years, she felt something she thought she'd lost, a sense of belonging and the promise of a brighter future. After dropping Ngozi off at work, Idris returned home, where the baby was already the center of attention. The housemaids had set up a cozy nursery, complete with a crib, soft blankets, and even a collection of baby clothes they had rushed out to buy that morning. The baby, now affectionately nicknamed Angel, was nestled peacefully in a bassinet, her tiny fingers clutching a stuffed animal. Idris stood by the doorway, his heart swelling at the sight. Later that afternoon, his phone buzzed. It was Ngozi. How's Angel? She asked, her voice tinged with curiosity and concern. She's fine, Idris replied with a chuckle. The staff is spoiling her already. I think she's going to have a royal childhood, if we're not careful. Ngozi laughed softly. I wish I could see her. It's strange how quickly I've grown attached to her. Then come by after work, Idris suggested. We can figure out a plan together. Ngozi hesitated, but eventually agreed. That evening, Ngozi arrived at Idris's mansion, her professional demeanor softening the moment she stepped inside. Angel's soft coos greeted her, and she instinctively reached out to hold the baby. She's so light, Ngozi murmured, cradling the infant against her chest. And so precious. Idris watched her, a smile tugging at his lips. You're a natural. Hardly, Ngozi said, laughing. I've never held a baby for more than a few minutes before. Well, you're doing great, Idris said. And we're in this together, remember? Over the next few days, Idris and Ngozi worked together to care for Angel. Idris, who had always relied on his staff for domestic matters, found himself learning how to change diapers, prepare formula, and soothe a crying baby. Ngozi, despite her demanding job, made time to visit daily, bringing her nurturing instincts and calm demeanor to the partnership. One evening, as they sat in the living room watching Angel sleep in her bassinet, Ngozi turned to Idris. Have you ever thought about having children of your own? Idris nodded slowly.
I have.
But after what happened with Aina, I wasn't sure if I'd ever find someone I could trust enough to start a family with. Ngozi looked away, her heart aching at the vulnerability in his voice. But now, Idris continued, his gaze softening, I feel like that might be changing. Ngozi met his eyes, her breath catching. The unspoken words between them hung heavy in the air. As the days turned into weeks, their partnership deepened. Idris marveled at Ngozi's ability to balance her career with her growing affection for Angel. Ngozi, in turn, admired Idris's humility and dedication, qualities she never expected from someone so wealthy. One evening, as they prepared Angel for bed, Ngozi couldn't help but smile. I never thought I'd be doing this. Playing mom to a baby I just met. Idris chuckled. And I never thought I'd be running to the store to buy baby bottles and diapers. Life has a way of surprising us, doesn't it? Ngozi's laughter faded into a thoughtful silence. Maybe that's a good thing. Their shared care for Angel became a bridge, connecting them in ways neither had anticipated. They found themselves opening up about their hopes, fears, and dreams, their bond growing stronger with each passing day. One night, as they sat in the nursery watching Angel sleep, Idris spoke up. Ngozi, I know we found Angel by chance, but I can't help feeling like this was meant to happen. Like she's here for a reason. Ngozi nodded, her eyes glistening. I feel the same way. And maybe she's here to teach us something about love, about trust. Idris reached for her hand, his touch gentle but firm. Ngozi, I know it's still early, and I don't want to rush you. But I'm ready to build a life. With you, with Angel. If you'll have me. Ngozi's heart raced, her emotions swirling. She wasn't ready to give an answer just yet, but for the first time, she felt herself leaning toward yes. Ngozi and Idris were enjoying a quiet evening together, watching Angel gurgle and wave her tiny fists in the air when Idris's phone buzzed. The caller ID showed it was the police station. His heart sank slightly as he answered. Mr. Idris, we need you and Ms. Ngozi to come down to the station, the officer said. And bring the baby with you. What's going on? Idris asked, his tone cautious. It's about the investigation, the officer replied. We'll explain everything when you get here. Idris ended the call and turned to Ngozi. We have to go to the station. They want us to bring Angel. Ngozi's brow furrowed in concern, but she nodded. Let's go. At the station, they were ushered into a small office where the officer in charge of the case was waiting. He gestured for them to sit before speaking. We've done extensive investigations to locate the baby's mother, he began. We checked local hospitals, questioned residents, and reviewed CCTV footage from the area. Unfortunately, we've come up with nothing. Ngozi's heart sank as she looked at Angel, who was nestled in her arms. So what happens now? The officer sighed. The best course of action is to take the child to a registered motherless baby's home, where she can receive proper care and possibly be put up for adoption. No. Ngozi and Idris exclaimed simultaneously. We've been caring for her, Idris said firmly. She's thriving with us. We want to adopt her. Ngozi nodded, her grip tightening on Angel. She's already a part of our lives. We can't just hand her over to strangers. The officer exchanged a glance with his colleagues, who had gathered to listen. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. Adoption is possible, but there are conditions. You need to apply formally, demonstrate financial stability, and he paused, his eyes narrowing slightly. You'll need to be married. Ngozi blinked in shock. Married? But we're not. The officer raised a hand. If you're serious about adopting this child, you need to provide a stable family environment. That means a legal marriage, shared responsibilities, and a long-term commitment to her well-being. One of the other officers chimed in, grinning. If you really want Angel, you know what to do. Go and marry. Another added, we'll give you 3 months. If you're not married by then, we'll have to take the baby and place her in the system. The room fell silent. Idris and Ngozi exchanged a stunned glance, the weight of the officer's words sinking in. As they drove back to Idris's mansion, Angel sleeping peacefully in her car seat, neither of them spoke at first. The silence was heavy, filled with unspoken thoughts. Finally, Ngozi broke the silence. This is unexpected. Idris nodded, his hands gripping the steering wheel. It's a lot to process. But one thing is clear. We can't lose Angel. Ngozi looked out the window, her mind racing. She had spent weeks getting attached to this little girl, feeling the stirrings of maternal love she never thought she'd experience. And now the thought of losing her was unbearable. But marriage? That was a whole different matter. Back at the mansion, Idris parked the car and turned to Ngozi. His expression was serious, but gentle. Ngozi, I know this is overwhelming, but maybe this is God's way of pushing us towards something we've been avoiding. Ngozi raised an eyebrow. You think this is divine intervention? I don't know, Idris admitted. But I do know that I love you, Ngozi. I've loved you since the first day I met you. And I can't imagine my life without you. Or without Angel. Maybe this is the nudge we needed to stop holding back. Ngozi stared at him, her emotions swirling. She knew he was right. About Angel, about their connection, about everything. But the idea of marrying him so suddenly, under these circumstances, left her torn. I need time to think, she said finally. Idris nodded, his eyes soft with understanding. Take all the time you need. But remember, we have 3 months. Ngozi had spent days mulling over how to address the storm of emotions swirling inside her. After the conversation with the police and the realization of what adopting Angel would entail, she knew she couldn't keep running. It was time to face her fears and Idris head-on. She arranged for them to meet at a serene lakeside park just outside the city. The place was secluded, with towering trees and a view of the calm water reflecting the hues of the setting sun. It was perfect for what she needed to say.